Let's turn in our Bibles tonight to Matthew chapter 5. Again, going back to the Beatitudes another time. Matthew chapter 5, and for tonight we'll just read the one verse, verse number 5. Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Let's go back also to 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2 for this evening. We used some here in Peter last night as well, but we want to notice 1 Peter chapter 2 this evening. We'll begin with verse number 19. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse number 19. For this is thankworthy if a man for conscience toward God endure grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it if, when ye be buffeted for your faults, ye shall take it patiently? But if, when ye do well and suffer for it, ye take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously. Using these two passages together tonight, I want to try to talk to you a little bit about the attitudes God blesses. The attitudes God blesses. Last night, of course, we focused on the poor in spirit. So we focused a little bit on sort of how and when we can have revival, the need for humility. But tonight we move sort of more into, maybe in some cases, some of the reasons why we need revival. What's going on in our lives? What kind of attitudes do we show? Do we show that we need revival? The correct answer for why to have revival is really not just a matter of bringing in all the unsaved people so we can try to preach to them. It's not just a matter of reaching those that are out there, but it's also to speak to our hearts and to start drilling down into our own souls, focusing deep into our own heart and personality. Here's an important question for us tonight. What do you expect revival to do for you? What are you hoping for in a meeting like this? Does God's presence impact your personal life in times like these? So really, revival will not be any more successful than what it does in our own hearts. Because this is not just a matter of, well, we have a church revival and hopefully other people can get help, but it's, what about me? What about in my own soul? Am I being like Jesus? Do my attitudes show it? We must each confront the man, woman, whomever it may be. We need to confront who we are, the attitudes that we've shown. And that's where meekness hits us pretty hard. Am I really meek and gentle in my spirit, in my attitude, in my reactions? It's one of the fruits of the Spirit. We can read Galatians 5, and of course we think about, well, there's love and joy and peace. And you even start to get into long suffering, which could involve this. But then we have that one that comes in that next verse. Meekness. Meekness. A gentleness about us. In fact, if you start looking there, you can find this sort of a spirit just flowing forth from the Spirit-filled life. It's what we ought to have. We admire it in other people, don't we? When we see that they respond in the right way, when we see that they seem like they are really gentle and they're mild and they don't react, or at least not in a harsh way, and all of those things, that's what we admire. But too often, if we're really honest, too often we start making excuses for how we react. Well, if you just knew what they did to me, if you just knew how hard this is, if you knew how unfair that is. But could I just tell you tonight that your attitude and mine, when things go wrong, show a whole lot about how godly we really are. We can make all sorts of professions, but how we react shows a lot about who we really are spiritually. The story is told of Francis Xavier. He was a missionary to Japan, and from what I understand, he must have been going through several cities. I don't know all the details there, but he was in one particular city anyway, and he was trying to preach the gospel and share with these Japanese people the love of Christ and all that was involved in the gospel message. And one particular city he was in, as he was preaching the gospel, there was, I suppose, a crowd gathered. I don't know, on the street or just where, but in the process, there was a man who came forward and came up close. I don't know if he kind of beckoned to Francis Xavier there or just what, but anyway, made it clear that he at least it seemed like he wants to tell him something in his ear. And so Francis Xavier just kind of bent down there, and when he did so, the man spit right on his face. And as the crowd's looking on, perhaps even sort of scorning right along with this man, Francis Xavier simply reached in his pocket and took out his handkerchief, wiped away the spit, continued on with his message without the least sign of annoyance or harshness. He just simply showed kindness, gentleness, meekness. When the people saw it, their scorn turned to admiration. There was one man in particular there, I don't know, maybe one of the more educated men, I believe he was a doctor, and maybe renowned even. I think he was one of the leading citizens of the city. And when he saw that, he said, that has to be from God. That has to somehow be the virtue of God showing through this man. And before very long, he also was seeking to be baptized. Why was it? Because the missionary showed a gentle, Christ-like spirit. But how would you have responded? How would I respond? If somebody treats me in a cruel and heartless way, it's not fair, and I don't understand this, and this is not right. Am I really ready to respond as Jesus did? Let's look a little bit this evening at our meek and gentle attitude, what it says about us and our likeness to Christ. For that really ought to be our theme. I want to be like Jesus. I want His Spirit to flow through me. I want to show the world what Jesus is like. If we're going to do so, the first thing we have to remember is that we have to purposely surrender our responses. Purposely surrender our responses. Let's go over to the book of Luke. Luke chapter 6. And we'll read just a few verses there. Luke chapter 6, verse number 27. Luke chapter 6, verse number 27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek offer also the other, and him that taketh away thy cloak forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods ask them not again. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. The sacrificial life that Jesus demonstrated for us ought to be the normal in our life, but we must purposely surrender our responses. Now, when we begin to look at a truth like this, people are quick to put up their defenses, you know. We like to make excuses. Maybe we'd even say something like this. Well, we're not supposed to be a doormat, are we? Surely a Christian doesn't have to be a doormat. Surely you don't have to just allow those things to go on. The problem with that is that Jesus suffered. And He acted this way. His instructions to His followers seem pretty clear overall. It's the way we're supposed to respond. So as much as we may protest, if we're going to be like Jesus, then we need to show meekness, and we need to be gentle and kind. have a right spirit. Even when people treat us in a pretty heartless way, pretty cruel, pretty mean and unkind. Too often we see around us, we maybe hear amongst us even, the response or the attitude, well, we just sort of have to take that instruction with a grain of salt. You can't go overboard. If you do that, people just take advantage of you. And they try to make excuses and try to make allowance so that I can act like I act and not feel less spiritual. Surely we can't take it too literally. But tonight I'm asking you to take it pretty literally. I'm asking you to purposely seek to be like Jesus. That should be our prayer. That should be our longing. Lord, make me like you. Help me to be like Jesus. No excuses, no camouflage, no beating around the bush, so to speak, can be acceptable. We must be like him. Your spouse, your children, your neighbors, your co-workers, your church family, whomever it may be. No one should have any doubt as to your testimony, the reality of your standing with God. What a tragic thing. Sometimes it may even happen where someone passes away. Maybe we were even fairly close to them. And we want to think the best. Perhaps I could even put that back on us. How tragic it would be if you or I were to pass away and our family wants to say, well, they have a good testimony. They love God. They serve God. But there's just that nagging doubt in the back of their mind because they think, well, I know how they responded, though. I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile that. I hope they're in heaven. I hope they made it. But they had some bad attitudes. What a tragic thing. I wouldn't want to have to die like that and leave behind that sort of testimony. And so we have to purposely surrender our responses. Second thing I want to notice with you tonight is also that we must purposely seek to be radiant. Purposely seek to be radiant. I think it was roughly 2 years ago that I may well have shared with you. I had either heard or read, I don't remember the details exactly. But many of you probably are familiar with Nancy Lee DeMoss, now Wolgemuth, I guess. But anyway, she was sharing a little bit about a pretty frustrating day of travel. And I don't know all the details. I don't remember exactly even where I came across it, if I heard it on the program or if I read it. But anyway, she was sharing how she had a frustrating day, and yet she approached it with this goal in mind. And I want you to get this tonight. Her goal was to act in such a way, this is her talking, so I'll say it that way, to act in such a way that I could talk with anyone, airline personnel, other tired passengers, my dear husband, could talk to anyone about Jesus without having lost credibility. That's a pretty good goal. And yet, too often, I'm afraid that that's gone by the wayside. People respond in such a way that it hinders their testimony. Could I even just admonish you here this evening, please, if you've responded in a harsh way, if you've not shown meekness or you've not shown gentleness, please don't use that opportunity to invite them to church or to tell them about the Lord. I'm afraid you do more harm than good. Because people know, they can see, this is not right, this is not consistent here. Please, just avoid that issue. Apologize. That's the best thing to do. Just go right ahead and apologize. Tell them, I'm sorry, I try to be what Jesus would want me to be, but I know I reacted in the wrong way right there, and I'm sorry. Just tell them. Very likely, they might even see it for themselves. They might very well know that. You're not going to hinder the cause of Christ nearly as much by simply admitting apologizing for a wrong response. Do that with your children, with your family. Be quick to back up. Be quick to apologize. But also, ask God to make you radiant. Peter tells us about how Jesus responded when the crowd reviled and persecuted him. A couple of different aspects I want to just notice with you quickly there. First of all, is it says that he did know sin. So he didn't react outwardly in a bad way. He did know sin. No carnal actions. No unkind responses that way. But also it says there was no guile found in his mouth. And so he didn't speak the wrong things either. He didn't act wrong. He didn't speak wrong. And one or the other of those things often can catch us. James even said that a perfect and upright man is the one who can control his tongue. And if you can't control your tongue, this man's religion is vain, is what he says. And so sometimes we need to say, Lord, help me in my actions and in my speech to be radiant. Stephen is another good example over in the book of Acts. The persecutors are falsely accusing him and throwing stones at him. He's basically on his deathbed, if you would want to put it that way. He's just about to die. And these enemies around him are seeing his face as the face of an angel. He's showing a radiance. Moses had plenty of trouble from those who were grumbling, complaining, murmuring. It was frustrating. Sometimes maybe he didn't respond perfectly, but the Bible says he was the meekest man on earth. And remember what happened whenever he came down off the mountain, having spent 40 days with God. His face just shone. It was as the face of an angel. Now, I don't know about you shining necessarily. Maybe you've known some people that almost would seem to shine. Just beauty about their character, beauty about their life. And I hope that you would be one of those and that I would be one. I want to be that way. I want to be a hero to those around me because of the Spirit of Christ on me. And in the midst of all of that, we need to recognize what makes us shine. I'd like to go back actually again to 1 Peter. And this time I want to notice a verse or so in chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. Peter says here, he's talking about those who are adorned in various ways. He's particularly talking to the wives. But he talks about the adornment, not the outward adornment, whether the plaiting of hair, wearing of gold, putting on apparel, probably some sort of a fancy garment. But then notice what he says in verse 4. 1 Peter 3 and verse 4. But let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. He says a meek and quiet spirit, a gentleness about us, is a beautiful ornament for us. It makes us beautiful. It makes us radiant. It makes us what others want to be around. They appreciate our testimony because they see that we are radiant. But we must purposely seek after that. Lord, make me like you. Make me like Jesus. Let me give you a couple of examples from nature. First one might be an egg. From what I understand, I think you can determine about whether they are rotten or not. That's really what we're thinking about tonight. It seems like there's a certain way you can put them in. Is it water, I guess, or something, and whether it floats or sinks or whatever, you can kind of tell if it's rotten. I can tell you another way. If you break it, you cut it open, you'll soon know if it's rotten or not. You can smell it. Yuck. That's nasty. That's about the way we respond. You can tell because it's been opened up. On the contrary, or on the other side of the coin, we might think about oranges. What happens when they're crushed or cut open? What happens when you start working with them? If you could give them human characteristics, when they're hurt, when they're cut, when they're bruised. Oh, they give off a wonderful aroma and taste. Oh, it smells so good. Somebody must have opened up an orange. The difference is what's on the inside. And the same thing is true for you and for me. We're going to radiate something. It might be rottenness, it might be nastiness, bad attitudes, bitterness. Or it might be the sweet Spirit of Christ beginning to flow out from us, radiating from our hurts, from our hardship, from our suffering. Purposely seek to be radiant. The last one I want to notice with you this evening is also that we must purposely submit to refining. One key for us, if we're going to really be meek and mild and gentle, is to recognize that God uses even bad circumstances in our lives to bring about good, to bring about blessing, to help us to grow. We need to remember in our periods of conflict and misunderstanding even, that God is working to refine us. God is trying to make us into His image. It may not be comfortable. It may not be fair. It may not be right. But really, if we're made more like Jesus, shouldn't we be content? That's our goal anyway. That I be like Christ. That I know Him. And that He knows me. And that He is working out His purpose in me. I believe it's in the blue book, your chorus book. It says, oh, it may be meant for evil, but God means it for good. If you respond properly, you can even allow those harsh circumstances to bring about good in your life. But if you respond badly, you miss the blessing of what God is trying to accomplish. It's not easy. I struggle with this myself. I know it's tough. One of probably the worst memories for me along this line, numbers of years ago. And I think I got the idea that it kind of made its way around a little bit. I think others heard about it. It's just been an ongoing shame for me. I felt bad. I was just a young person, but I was in a little bit of a position of leadership for a short time there, and was in a particular place. We were playing ball, and it seemed like maybe some emotions getting a little bit high, and I made a judgment on what I thought somebody was doing, how I felt like they weren't handling the situation wisely, and I quickly just responded. And you just go on. Cooler heads prevailed pretty soon, and we got back to the game, and things kind of simmered down. But I've carried that shame with me for years, especially because it seemed like some others maybe heard about it. And how do you even go back and try to make that right? And I don't even know who all was there. And then when it gets passed on, then I don't know who else to go to. All those things. And sometimes God has to just start working on us and say, you remember that? You might not be able to go back and change that, but let's start working on you. Let's work on your spirit. Let's work on your attitude. You need to be more like Jesus. You need to seek after God. Sometimes maybe people don't even outwardly retaliate. I mean, that would kind of give a bad taste, a bad impression. That's probably going to come across poorly, and so they won't respond outwardly necessarily. But the problem is on the inside, there's bitterness that starts to creep up, or maybe there's a bad spirit, a rottenness, resentment over how they were mistreated. And part of having the right attitude is recognizing that God wants to use it, maybe sometimes even our failures, but especially our hardships and our sufferings, to bring about some growth in us and to teach us and to show us you can grow through this. I want to refine you. Over the last little bit, I guess I focused a little bit on Job there at our home church, and one of the real blessings in that book is chapter 23 when he says he knows the way I take. Notice what else he said. When he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. I'll be a better person. God will have molded me into his image. I'll be what he wants me to be. I will come forth as gold. But in order for that to happen, we must purposely submit to his refining. Many times we may have more of the idea, we would like to say, well, that can't be of God because that's hurtful. But maybe God is allowing some of these things even to refine us. And so tonight, maybe we could just have a fresh reminder that some things just have to be surrendered to God. Through it all, we must stay radiant. And then we also need to recognize that God can use those things to refine us, to make us into his image. Oh, that we might be like Jesus. Oh, that others might see that that's the way we are. God is pleased because we show forth Christ to the world around us. Could I just talk to you for a few moments yet? Please, please, don't just profess a satisfactory experience with God and then be harsh in your responses, where you bring about shame to your family or embarrassment to your pastor. Don't be like that. Don't allow yourself to be inconsistent. But just say, Lord, help me to always respond properly. Maybe this is a little bit harsh. I don't mean this to be harsh or cruel or unkind in any way, but I have a feeling that where it seems like we've just lost maybe a generation of young people. I'm afraid that it comes right back to this. People come to church and they can testify and say, yeah, I love God. God's helped me this week or whatever else. But our kids know that this week I was harsh and cruel in my responses. When somebody cut me off in traffic, how I responded. They see those things. They see how inconsistent it is. And sometimes they may just say, I don't want anything to do with that. They're not who they say they are. They testify one thing in church, and then they go home. They go out and about in town or wherever it may be, and they don't show meekness. They're not gentle. They're not Christ-like. Please don't keep people from church because they know how your temper gets out of hand. Because they know that you're not much like Christ. And don't hinder revival either by making excuses for bad attitudes. Keep a meek and gentle spirit that makes people think of Jesus. So tonight in closing, is there anybody that you need to apologize to? Is there an action, an attitude that you showed that wasn't right? And you need to back up. Maybe even you just need to pray tonight. I know this is not maybe the type of message you just enjoy coming forward to pray, but maybe you would feel like I need to pray through on some temptation. I know that I struggle with this. I know the devil often hounds me, and I don't feel like I respond properly. And I'm sorry. I don't want it to be like this. I want to take care of it tonight. Maybe you'd like to pray about that. You can be a great testimony to the grace of God if you'll truly be a gentle, meek person under fire. So let's stand together tonight. I want to give you a quick opportunity to pray. If there's anybody you feel like that's me, I want to be like Jesus, and I know I struggle there. I know I haven't been quite what God wants me to be, then this is your opportunity to pray tonight.